begin the meeting, Soma?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Mrs. Lakshmi Rao is a practicing advocate in the Supreme Court. She is not only a qualified advocate, but also a qualified engineer from Sardar Patel College of Engineering and has also done her MBA from NMIMS. She has represented many cases which we are familiar with, such as the Revanna MP of the Karnataka case, where she, along with senior advocate Pramila Nesargi, represented a voter in the case against Prajwal Revanna. We welcome you, ma'am. Advocate Balaji Srinivasan is an additional Advocate General. He likes to call himself a fierce defender of the Constitution. Having appeared on behalf of the main petitioner, Shaira Banu, in the landmark Triple Talaq case, and having succeeded in getting the misogynist practice set aside by the Supreme Court, he looks forward to fighting similar legal battles. He also appears on behalf of Ramjet Malani in the public interest litigation petition seeking effective steps to bring back black money stashed abroad and for the petitioners in the one rank one pension case, which when concluded he hopes will leave an indelible mark on India's social fabric. Since Mr. Balaji Srinivasan and Mrs. Lakshmi Rao are husband and wife, we decided to take a combined interview for both of them. Both of you come from a complete different field altogether. So what motivated you to suddenly pursue law?
See, I have been working for corporates, that is, you always work for someone. Doing this course will help me to be on my own so that I can be my own boss. And plus, at least I can make a difference to a few people's life who are actually in trouble. And the flexibility of working from home and the advantage of having a lawyer as well. These were the additional factors.
And so?
See, I had done my hotel management. I was a management trainee in a leading hotel chain. At that point of time, my father, who was my best friend, spoke to me and told me to consider if I would want to retire at the age of 58 and or if I became a lawyer, I don't have to retire and life will be very good. And I can be captain of my soul and master of my ship. So it was that which pushed me to do law.
So because you both pursue law, there must be some factor that must be in you may find something which interests you most about your field of specialization or your field of interest.
We work in the Supreme Court, so basically it is the variety of cases which we see that I find it interesting. And then we do cases from APTEL also, which is my domain area of electrical engineering. And NCDRC, where we are all consumers at some point of different goods and services. So these are the areas which I find it interesting.
So,
see, the area of specialization by default happens when you practice in the Supreme Court because the cases already come up, travel to 3-4 layers, and what is before the Supreme Court is only a question of law. And you have to specialize in putting across your case in those 2 minutes which you get. Because the judge has about 60 cases to decide on the day. And 95% of the cases which are put before the court are rejected. It's only the 5% which pass the muster for consideration and adjudication. In that background, the specialization is to put across your case in few minutes. And what is the crux of the case, and you have to understand what will appeal to the judge. It's that specialization which you need. So you get your 2 minutes, 60 cases, the odds are very high. It's that crux which really excites me, and I'm sure it excites her also.
We have seen where the cases just gets turned over in just seconds.
True, ma'am. Absolutely. So, sir, like said, you come from a hotel management background, and ma'am, you come from you did your MBA and then engineering. Both of you come from complete different fields. So when you began your advocacy, when you started pursuing law, what kind of difficulties you had to face?
For me, it was very different when I just entered the law school also. Because when you come from a science background and from an engineering background, you have only one right answer for a question. So law is completely different. When you read a judgment, you see that based on the same facts, Both the sides are putting forth their contentions and both are absolutely convincing. So this was something which took me time for to come to terms with.
And so,
See, for me, I had not much difficulty because I came from a family of lawyers. I'm a second generation lawyer in that sense. So all the difficulty was faced by my first generation lawyer, that was my father. I had unflinching support of my family. After I joined my senior, it was of course a roller coaster ride because it was a very intellectually stimulating office to be in Bangalore. Then after I became a lawyer, when it was getting a little bit lonely in the office, Lakshmi joined me and she kind of supports me. And in the office, whenever I am under stress, she walks into my office and asks me, "What's bothering you? Tell me." And that really takes away major part of the stress.
that's a very sweet story, sir, ma'am, both. So, like we all know, in the present generation, in the current scenario, artificial intelligence has a very major role to play. And everybody considers that artificial intelligence is 97% right. So do you feel that in the coming future, artificial intelligence can replace advocates?
AI can never replace human judgment. So in professions like ours or in case of doctors, where things have to be decided based on facts which are unique to each case, I don't see any scope of AI. But of course, there are enough tools on which judgments would apply to a particular case. You have the search engines where some kind of artificial intelligence does apply, but not while deciding a case.
So
I am technologically challenged. So for me, computer is a glorified typewriter. So what I see around me is completely different, even beyond my imagination. I mean, for instance, the way we are talking today itself is very, very, I can't tell you the experience I am going through because I am not on social media. I don't use much of technology. For me, I prefer to read from books. I still can't read from a screen. So that's how challenged I am. But going by the kind of gadgets I see around me, I'm sure artificial intelligence is going to play a role. It's going to play a much more effective role, especially after this pandemic when people are not going to be able to physically travel across places to put across their point. This is certainly going to play. One place where I immediately foresee it applying is clubbing of cases, identical, similar issues pending across in the same court, in various cases which is humanly not possible to be bunched together, may get bunched, which will result in consistency in decision making and therefore reducing conflict in decisions.
So now that there's COVID, everybody is having so much of problem. How are you dealing with the online court sessions that are happening?
The same way as we deal with it right now. Yeah, I mean, we're getting comfortable by the day. And as you can see, my son is far more comfortable with the computer screen than us.
Oh yeah, the judges are still struggling.
So if there are going to be a ranking which is to be put in the house as to who is more technologically savvy, I think my son would beat us both hollow. And then it's Lakshmi and then it's lastly me, who is able to understand this technology and the way it's being put across.
Being sort of old school has its own comfort zone. So I completely understand that. So, sir, ma'am, it's a question to both that the general public feels that currently Indian judiciary is very lenient when it comes to dealing with cases. So do you feel that there should be some new laws that we should introduce or we should adopt from other constitutions like the three-strike law?
I feel the Indian system is still not mature enough to have very stringent laws like the three-strike law which is there in developed countries.
Mm-hmm. So what is your take on this?
See, as I understand your question, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, by three-strike law, you mean if a repeat offender comes back to court, how is he dealt with? Is the punishment lenient towards him or it's more strict? Is the question, right?
So in the developed countries, it's three-strike law means when the same criminal comes the third time, he is directly hanged or imprisoned for like given life imprisonment. In
without even,
that's what the developed countries do
without even a trial, is it?
without even a trial. That's what the three strike law means. The third time you've done a crime, whether it's a small one or a major one, anything, you are hanged, you are imprisoned.
Well, I mean, conforming to our Indian constitution, I don't think this three strike law would pass the muster of the constitutional values we espouse. So therefore, in Indian law, suppose a person accused of an offence under 356 is convicted once. When he stands trial again, post conviction, the punishments are provided for. But there has to be a trial which is very fair, which conforms to the criminal jurisprudence which we espouse. For instance, if a person convicted under 302 is guilty of having committed a similar crime, I don't think there is any further leniency provided to him except for giving him a death sentence. That's what IPC provides for. So therefore, we in our own way have this probably three strike law or a variation of that in our system. But to me, it sounds I would completely reject the idea that when a person comes a third time, he would straight away be punished without there being a trial. For two reasons. One, our constitution will not permit it. Two, the society where we live in, it's very easy for the police to frame somebody. And it's much easier for somebody to frame a person third time.
Yes, so I completely agree because recently, actually, I guess yesterday, I was sitting with my father and discussing about a case where an 84-year-old man was alleged of raping his tenant's daughter and when she gave birth to a child. So I feel this blame game of police not giving an opportunity to that old man to present his case, even though he has proof that he's not done it, does exist. I guess after that case, I'm quite sure about what you said. So, ma'am, in your journey of litigation, you have dealt with a lot of high-profile cases. Both of you have dealt. So, what is your approach towards media, or how has media treated you?
Media, see, before I became a lawyer, whatever information I had was through media, right? You see the news and you read the newspapers. So that's how you feel, oh, this is right or that is wrong. But once I got into this profession, then I realized that media is pretty superficial when it comes to reporting. So you have to actually go through the judgment and then see what has actually been said in a particular case.
So
I have a view. See, the role played by the media can't be denied. It is, in most of the cases, the causes they espouse or highlight tend to set the narrative in many ways, at least in public domain, not with the judges or in the corridors of the court. It kind of sets a tone for discussions to happen, and people become aware of what the issues are, and that's how the whole thing is. But what Lakshmi said brings a very unique perspective to the debate, is whether media is doing the job impartially. What is the job of the media? Is to faithfully report facts, not cross the Rubicon or the Lakshman Rekha as it is called, and start projecting your own value system or your own views. For instance, in one of the cases where we were doing, and she was very closely associated with, there was a section of media which went after us, questioned our religion, questioned our beliefs, questioned our gender, and the reasons why we are doing it. So that it becomes malicious. So, but by and large, media is doing a decent job. The reason why all this happens is the media today is not trained to report facts. So the moment a training is given, you would find journalists who know facts report very differently, or those media houses are known to be very neutral than the other media houses where the training is not imparted or the way the accreditation happens is not foolproof. So you will find the difference.
So, sir, you feel, both of you feel that media has somewhere influenced some part of the decision that the court pronounces. Is that's what you're trying to say?
I would say that though the judges read, but I don't think it influences their decisions. But then, of course, they have no forum in which they can deny or accept what has been said.
So speaking for myself and the little bit of judiciary, what I have seen, judges by nature are trained to deal with the facts that is presented to them and case laws that is applicable to the case. They would not get carried away by the media reports or what is discussed in the media. For instance, recent decision of the Madras High Court, which went against the popular narrative. This concerns the honor killing, where the father of the girl or the witnesses had been acquitted, and his death sentence awarded to him has been set aside solely on the facts that the judge believed is to be correct in law. So the question is still at large whether the Supreme Court, what view it will take, it will not take. But there was a huge media narrative when the case was being argued. But the judges were not bothered by what was being said outside the court. So I don't think judges are in any way influenced by what happens in the media.
So, sir, now that we are talking of judiciary, so there's also a thing that of late judicial activism has become a very controversial aspect. So don't you think it impinges on the function and powers of the executive? And there was also a suggestion by the government to streamline judicial employments by creation of the IGS. So what is your opinion? What is your take on this?
This is a very, very complicated topic to be addressed even in few sessions. So I would attempt to, answer it. I mean, to even broadly touch the topic would require some time of, discussion. But there are two schools of thought which are prevalent. One is doctrine of separation of powers, which we all know. Every department or every organ of the state should do their job. Other organ does not interfere with the functioning of one organ does not interfere with the functioning of the other. But there is also another thought which points towards judicial activism or which has led towards judicial activism. It is the inefficiency in the governance. So these are two aspects. To put it very simply for the purpose of this talk, if every organ of the government does their job, then there is no requirement of judiciary in the system itself. The judiciary exists because there is some lacuna somewhere. Somebody has not been able to resolve a dispute or a issue. It is for that reason the judicial system is set up. So by nature, judiciary will resolve issues. In the process, will comment on the functioning of the other organs of the state. If that happens, to what extent it is to be allowed, to what extent it should not be allowed, is the debate about. If I can say so. Now, coming to the question of one judicial, what was that? IGS is Indian Judicial Service. See, we have to understand our constitution is very federal in nature. Law and justice is a concurrent subject. The states can legislate their own laws. They have their own requirements to deal with. The constitution recognizes the state to be a unit which has to be administratively insulated, and therefore centralization is not permissible in every angle of governance. That is why you will find when you're getting into state judiciary, knowledge of local language is very important. For instance, in Maharashtra, for the judge to be in subordinate judiciary, he needs to know Marathi. Otherwise, he would not be able to decide cases or even understand what the case is. A witness, what he tells you in Marathi, will be far more clearer if you understand it in that language. If it's going to be translated or there is going to be a handicap of language, then I don't think justice will happen. To that extent, if you are able to resolve that issue, then this Indian judicial system is a very innovative and a very welcome requirement. But if you are not able to address that issue, ultimately the person who seeks justice has to be satisfied. The judge who has decided my case has understood what I want to tell him. Moment it reaches that level of, it's a very high level of high test to be crossed, high benchmark is set and has to be crossed. If that benchmark is crossed, then Indian judicial system is a very welcome setup. Otherwise, it may not work the way we want it to work.
Now, sir, ma'am, both of you have, dealt with cases like, so you have dealt with the triple talaq case, and ma'am, you supported the voter in the Revanna case. So when you were taken up these cases, did you know that the tables are going to be turned, that they will carve themselves in the book of history of India? Did you know that they're going to become such huge cases?
I had no clue. See, I just follow the principle of give your best shot to whatever you have on hand. That's it. And then just leave it. Because as far as judicial system is concerned, after a certain point, you don't have a control, right? Once you file the petition, then it goes to the judge. Then it's up to his interpretation as to what is it. And you just get hardly in Supreme Court a 30-second, 1 minute or a 2 minute for your case. So that is going to be the deciding factor. So it's very difficult to anticipate when we get a case that what is going to change and what is not going to change.
So,
see, to my limited mind, I agree with what Lakshmi has to say. That when we are drafting a case or when we are dealing with a case, you have a limited understanding of how important it is to the public. But after it is put in public domain, then the interest it generates is something which we can't comprehend. For instance, when we were working on triple talaq, we had no idea as to where this case will go. We knew it was important. We knew we had a very difficult task to do. We knew that. But beyond how it played out in the media, or how the narrative that got formed, at least in public domain, is something which I could personally not comprehend. I think Lakshmi also will agree with me when I say that we had no idea of how it will go on. And the most important aspect of triple talaq is again how much importance we give to a particular aspect of the case and not the other aspect. Shaira Banu is going to be known for having set aside the talaq-e-biddat or triple talaq as we know it. But it is going to be read by various law schools and in future cases for the proposition principle of manifest arbitrariness, which was put in the petition. And that was decided by the Supreme Court. So that is that narrative or that aspect of the case. I don't think I personally realize that it's going to be important in that aspect.
So now, how huge the case is, how big the case is, the people involved also are very huge and very well connected. So have you ever received any unwelcoming call because of which you felt that no, you don't want to take up a case, you don't want to continue handling a case, or maybe because media would have exaggerated the whole thing, receiving criticism or whatever, you felt that you should take a back step from the case?
I don't think so. I have ever personally got any threatening matters. Threatening calls, or for instance, even intimidating. See, you will have to understand, when you people become lawyers and some of you get to courts, you will realize there's a fantastic amount of harmony which exists between the lawyers when they are doing their matters. They are very civil to each other. They are extremely courteous to each other. I think Lakshmi will also speak for her experience in court. Whenever she has done well, first person to go and congratulate her will be the lawyer who appeared against her. In fact, he will call and tell me, Lakshmi has done a fantastic job in court today. So I don't think our system is that adversarial where it gets very personal. It doesn't get personal at all. Ultimately, at the end of the day, there are issues which have to be resolved, and the issues are being debated and resolved. So that is where it starts and ends. Yes, there are cases in which the associations pass a resolution saying that nobody will defend X accused or Y accused, and they will immediately call it back. I don't think any lawyer who is worth his salt will ever say that I will not take up a case because I will incur the wrath of the public, or I will go against the narrative, or I will be unpopular. I don't think any lawyer will.
Ma'am, what do you want? If
I have not dealt with, I have not had the opportunity of dealing with criminal cases. So I'm just 3 years in practice now. So I haven't been got any such kind of calls.
now, so while we know that Advocate Pramila Nesargi ma'am has a very major role to play in both your lives. So how was the experience of working with her?
I think I only work with Pramila Nesargi.
She has been her. Balaji has been her. I know her as a person.
As a person. She's a very fantastic human being, a wonderful boss, an uncompromising taskmaster. She used to wear multiple hats at any given time. When I was working with her, she was a legislator, she was a lawyer, she was a leader, a deputy leader of opposition in the assembly. So working with her will really bring about a huge spectrum of issues which you deal with. I mean, everything with her was debated, decided before it went into public domain. So for instance, if she had to ask a question in the assembly where she really will be cornering the government, there will be huge amount of research that will go in, data collected. It's thereafter a question is framed and sent to the assembly, and the assembly thereafter forwards it to the department. So there's a whole process by which a question is asked and answered in the floor of the assembly. So that's a very, very unique perspective. Her understanding of law was far ahead of anybody of us, because we were rookie juniors and she was 50 years in the profession by then. So she had a huge amount of experience. She was well conversant with all branches of law. Nothing would surprise her in court. She would actually tell you the case law, which is pat on the point, and all you have to do was get out the book and give it to her to argue.
That's very nice. So I wanted to know your take on, you dealt with a case that was regarding the end-to-end encryption of WhatsApp, the WhatsApp end-to-end encryption, and it was said that the state is not interested in linking Aadhaar to social media accounts for authentication purposes, but at the same time, the state also wants some semblance of traceability that can aid it in investigating crimes. So I wanted to know from both of you that, do you think that traceability is technologically possible on an end-to-end encrypted platform? Want to know the answer? Part 2 of the interview will be released soon. Till then, please like, share, and subscribe Small Talk India on YouTube. You can also check out Small Talk India on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.